Hi, I want to tell you about one of my favorite 1930s British novels, The Death of the Heart by Elizabeth Bowen. Um, and it ends in a way that many of my students found to be very typically British. And I want to talk about why that is and why it's appropriate in a way for the book, but how it would definitely strike an American audience as completely wrong and backward. But before I get to the ending, I have to set it up a little bit, obviously. So Portia is the protagonist. She's around 16, and she is living with her stepbrother, Thomas, and his wife, Anna, because her mother has recently died, and her father, who was also Thomas's father, passed away some time ago. Um, anyway, so Portia has led kind of a nomadic existence, you might say, with her mother. So when she comes to live with Thomas and Anna, she doesn't really know where she belongs. And in fact, Thomas and Anna live at a place with a very symbolic address. It's called 2 Windsor Terrace. And that number 2 implies basically that Portia is a third wheel, that they're not really ready to accept a third member of their family just yet. Thomas is quite a bit older than Portia, and he's very emotionally unavailable. And Anna, who is her stepsister at this point, is much older than Portia, much more experienced, and kind of cold emotionally, in part because she has married Thomas, and she did not really love Thomas as much as she might have done. Her own heart was previously kind of given and broken by a man with the strange last name Pigeon, which might have some religious significance since Bowen is a Catholic. Um, anyway, so in London, Portia meets a young man named Eddie. And Eddie is a bit older than Portia and a lot more sophisticated. He's also very cynical. He's very ambitious. He wants to get into the game of advertising, and that is Thomas's profession. Profession that Thomas kind of feels awkward about since he doesn't find it very dignified, and it marks him as very modern and urban and superficial, basically, in the way that Bowen portrays him. So Eddie kind of strings Portia along for quite a while, and she gets her hopes up, but then he ultimately says, "No, I'm not really interested in a serious relationship with you." And of course, Portia is completely brokenhearted, hence the title of the novel, The Death of the Heart. And she doesn't know what to do with herself. So she decides she doesn't want to go back to Thomas and Anna, and she goes and finds refuge at the apartment of a much older man named Major Brutt, who is sort of a friend of Thomas and Anna's, but who Thomas and Anna don't particularly care for. And she proposes actually just to stay with him. Now, he's a confirmed bachelor. He has no place in his life for Portia, either as a flatmate or, as a much younger and very inappropriate companion. But Portia won't budge. So there's a dilemma posed at the end of the book. What should Thomas and Anna do? Now, in an American novel, I suggest that the idea would be for them to go over and have an emotional get-together, that finally their hearts would melt and Portia would, reciprocate, and they'd have a very satisfying emotional reunion. That's not what happens, though. What happens is that Anna decides to send Matchett, who is the family servant. She's been with the family for generations, it seems like. She does the spring cleaning, and she's a very forceful, kind of determined, authoritative presence. And the turning point in the book actually comes when Anna is asked to put herself into Portia's shoes, and the character who does this is named Saint Quentin, who is a novelist and who basically is Bowen's stand-in in the book. He comments a lot on the goings on and actually kind of makes fun of them for sending Matchett. But anyway, he asks Anna, well, how would you feel in Portia's situation? And Anna does a pretty good job of empathizing with Portia's conflicting feelings. She decides that Portia would feel contempt for unmarried people, looking cautious and touchy, but also contempt for married people, keeping on playing up, a frantic desire to be handled with feeling, and at the same time to be let alone, a wish to be asked how I felt, but also a wish to be taken for granted. So Anna finally empathizes with the conflicting feelings that Portia must be having, but with all those feelings in the air, it's still very unclear how to meet this response. Well, the answer to this lies to some extent in the period in which the novel was written, in the 1930s, when Europe was kind of facing the threat of fascism, and fascism comes up quite a bit in the book, as a matter of fact. So the dilemma in some ways is, how do Thomas and Anna respond, and how do they get Portia back home? Well, the answer is not to try to get Eddie involved. Eddie, by the way, is, very unreliable. He's also a left wing, which makes him unreliable, especially in Bowen's eyes. Bowen's a rather conservative novelist. So what is the answer? Well, the answer is to basically return to traditional values and class hierarchies. So in that traditional value system, Matchett would be the governess who would take care of Portia as befits an upper class family. So the fitting thing to do then is to send the servant to do her job and get Portia back into the household. And we see that when Matchett approaches Major Brutt's flat, she rings, she pushes on the brass knob with authority. So we know she's going to get the job done. But yeah, my students found this ending to be, if not unsatisfactory, at least kind of hard to wrap their minds around. But it does make sense within the world of the novel that Bowen has created, where basically the modern world, as represented by London, is a place where innocence, Portia's innocence, really doesn't belong. And in fact, there's a passage where Bowen talks about, innocence both needs to be kind of protected from others, but that the world also needs protection from innocence. And and the only protection is in the reversion to a very stable class system where the servants kind of do the things that are needed to protect the children. And that's why Matchett is sent. She has the authority to bring Portia home that Portia will never question. Thomas uses a phrase that gestures towards this sort of allegorical reading of the novel as almost like a military operation at the very end. He says, well, to get Portia back, it's got to be a coup or nothing. In other words, like a very decisive military operation to recover Portia. And that's how the novel ends. Thanks for listening.